So it really bothers me that Janie didn't want the Mounties to search her trailer on the day that the children went missing. I'm going to do a separate video where I look at that, or looking at her entire trailer basically. But in this video, I just wanted to address one particular thing. Now, just going back to why she didn't want them to search her trailer. Now, her claim is that she was worried about her dog. Maybe that is the case. Maybe, this woman claims to be a hermit. Maybe it was a simple case of she just didn't want people in her private space. Maybe the whole situation was just so overwhelming for her that she just wasn't thinking straight and was panicking at the thought of them wanting to search her trailer. Maybe it's a distrust of authorities, which is something you quite often see in regional areas like that. She does actually mention that she asked a few of the searchers to do the search of her RV for her, which certainly suggests that she had an issue directly with the RCMP. Or it could be that there was something in that RV that she didn't want law enforcement to see, whether it was connected to the case or maybe just something that was illegal and shouldn't have been in there in the first place. The other side of it is that we have these claims that Justin was living on the property in her RV, and yet you have people trying really, really hard to debunk that. So is it possible that there's some reason why he should not be living on the property there, and she didn't want them searching the RV because they would have seen that he was living there? Only Janie can tell us the truth of this, and to be honest, I don't think that's going to happen. If you saw my recent video addressing the swings that the kids allegedly were playing on that morning, then you will know that Janie is far from credible. She's good at making up stories. So in this video, I want to address claims that are made by Janie, an occurrence that may or may not be linked to the search of Janie's RV. And that, of course, is the story regarding Janie being out on the driveway crying when Belinda arrived, and Janie's claims that she was crying because she blamed herself for the children going missing. When I heard her say this, I didn't really find it overly credible. But thankfully, we have two different accounts of this particular instance. We have Janie's version and we have Belinda's version. So in this video, I'm going to play both of them, and then I'm going to play a few other clips that should clarify the situation quite well. Before I move on to those clips, I will say that my contention is that Janie resented those children. So I can't see why she would therefore blame herself for them going missing, because generally you would have to actually care about those children to blame yourself. So on that note, let's jump in and start to try and unravel this tangled tale.
There was a bench sitting here, or a sawhorse, it's over there, was sitting here. I was sitting on it, bawling my eyes out. I was crying because I blame myself for not getting up that morning to see the kids, because if I would have got up, this wouldn't have never happened. Okay? That's why I was crying.
So that, of course, is the official version that we hear on the CBC interview. And she comes across as being defensive and a little bit verbally aggressive. Especially at the end of it when she goes, okay, like, you have to believe me. And in fact, her demeanour does not match what she is saying. if she's saying that the reason she was crying is because she blames herself for the children going missing, I would expect to see her being quite emotional while she is saying it. It's not something that I was crying over it a week ago. But yeah, I blame myself for the children going missing, but now I'm just going to be angry with you or sound aggravated with you because I want to make sure that you are listening and I want to make sure that you believe me. So I'm going to have this aggressive tone basically saying, you have to believe me on this. It does not match the story. Anyway, I've done a full analysis video of that particular interview, so I'm not going to keep going in depth on that right now. I think the main takeaway thing here, though, is that she is confrontational as opposed to being regretful, and she is quite insistent over, you need to believe me.
And I'm going to clear up this thing about Belinda. Belinda said that she came and she said that I was crying and I blame myself for it, and this is the time that I wouldn't let the police in, said that I wouldn't let the police in my RV. Well, the reason why I was crying, Belinda, is I blame myself for not getting up that morning and seeing the kids, because whenever they're outside, I'm usually out there. I'm the one watching those kids. I watch those kids out in the yard every day. That's why I blame myself for not getting up that day. If I would have got up, this would have never happened. So that's why I was crying that day, Belinda, is because I blame myself for not getting up for those kids.
So now we get the Facebook version of it. Now, I just want to point out that this was a little while after the release of the CBC interview, and I'll come back to why that is important shortly. So this was an audio from, on Facebook, Janie was answering a whole bunch of questions that people had for her, and she was doing them via audio. And then someone posted that audio for people to listen to. I ended up copying all the audio because it is quite interesting. I do have that unlisted currently, and I will be releasing it in the near future for people to listen to. Now, when she introduces this topic, she is so desperate to push her side of it that even her explanation of what Belinda said gets a little bit muddled. She says, Belinda said I was crying and I blame myself for it, and said I wouldn't let the police in my RV. So she's getting mixed up because Belinda didn't actually say any reason why Janie was crying. She just observed that Janie was crying. She observed what was happening at the time. So this is Janie's interpretation. But note she says she threw into it, and I blame myself for it. You'll hear shortly that actually doesn't come into it at all in terms of what was occurring that Belinda observed. Now she starts onto the reason I was crying was because I blame myself for not getting up that morning and seeing the kids. I'm going to say I believe that she settled onto this narrative because, in her opinion, it made her look good. The problem is, it is easy to disprove. So then she goes on to say, usually when the kids are out there, then she's out there with them, watching them. She's the one watching those kids. She says, I watch these kids out in the yard every day. Now, on the surface, you could think, okay, she's saying, look, this is how much I care about them because I'm the one who goes out and I'm the one who watches them. Now, had she said, I offered to keep an eye on them for Malaya so she can look after Meadow, then yes, that might ring true. But to me, It sounds more like she is resentful of the fact that, in her opinion, Malaya is not keeping an eye on the kids. Someone's got to do it, so she's got to do it. So it sounds more like she's actually pissed off about having to keep an eye on the kids. Not that she willingly does it or that she happily does it. And of course then she throws in her line, if I would have got up, this would have never happened, which bothers me because that makes it sound more like something occurring there on the property, a single event happening. I may be wrong, but just the wording of it made me feel that she was referring to something, some sort of accident occurring or something. She doesn't say, if I'd have got up, then they wouldn't have vanished. They wouldn't have wandered off on their own. I would have seen them. It's a thing that happened. When I hear someone referring to this thing that happened, instantly my mind goes to a single event, a single action or a single occurrence. This thing happened. Someone smashed the window. This thing happened. Not the children wandered off into the woods. She then goes on to repeat, that's why I was crying. And she puts on this affected voice that sounds like maybe she is crying. Which is quite interesting because when you see that original clip that was the CBC interview, she certainly wasn't crying there. She wasn't emotional. She was somewhat verbally aggressive. She is describing exactly the same thing, and yet her demeanour is poles apart. One hand, it's that sort of aggressive, in-your-face, you need to believe me. And the other hand is the, poor me, I'm so upset, I'm miserable. Which to me says that that second one that we just heard then, the super emotional one, is a complete utter put-on. Like I said, this recording occurred after the CBC interview. And we know that a lot of content creators did a review of that CBC interview. And I would imagine that I wasn't the only content creator who called out the fact that she was talking about crying over the children going missing and was not showing that appropriate emotion. So I think that she's actually paid attention to what content creators have said about the CBC interview and decided to put on the fake tears for her audience on Facebook, because clearly the first time round it wasn't convincing. Note also with these put on tears, you don't hear her trying to gasp for breath. She just goes from 0 to super emotional in one go, but the cadence really doesn't change. Now, when you become emotional, you tend to start sniffing and grasping for breath. None of that is occurring. It really does sound like a complete, utter put-on there. And like I said, it doesn't match her demeanour when she said it on the interview. And what she's talking about here is blaming herself for the children going missing, which she's implying that she is suffering from trauma. If you are suffering from trauma, then your reaction with regards to that trauma is going to be consistent, meaning that when you relay that trauma, each time you likely are going to become distressed. So the fact that we have complete polar opposites in her demeanour when she is talking about blaming herself for the children going missing says to me that that story itself is complete utter BS. Otherwise, we would have consistency in her emotions between the two retellings. The other thing that's really telling to me here is that she tries to double down on it by saying, I blame myself for not getting up for those kids. She doesn't say, I blame myself for not getting up for the kids or for Jack and Lily, but those kids. When you hear someone referring to children as those kids, it just has that negative, it's that separation thing. Those kids, they have no connection with me. She's establishing an emotional separation between herself and Lily and Jack. By saying those, it makes it clear that actually she feels no emotional connection to those kids. Which of course kind of destroys the argument of claiming that she blames herself for them going missing. So what is clear here though is that she is using that as her explanation for why she was crying at the time when Belinda saw her. She was crying because she blames herself for the children going missing. We can be pretty confident that that is not the reason she was crying. So now I'm going to play a clip from that other YouTube channel, and it's a Criming Shame. Sorry, I don't actually listen to that channel, so I forget the name. I'm going to play an audio clip from that channel of Belinda describing the incident.
I know when we come into the driveway, Janie was sitting on some kind of a bench thing or something in the driveway, and I can't remember who the woman was beside her. There was a policewoman standing there, and the policewoman was talking to them. We couldn't make out what she was saying until we got up closer. And Janie was really crying a lot. And this woman was saying to her, "It's okay, Mom. They're not blaming you. They just want to look in your trailer. They're not blaming you. They just need to make sure that there's nothing in the trailer." And she went on to say that there was nothing in the trailer. She didn't want them around her dog. And the policewoman told her that she was impeding an investigation and she would have to get a search warrant. And then I thought, well, we'll just continue on into the trailer.
Now, this explanation makes sense. First of all, it is linear. So when I'm listening to it, it sounds like she is relating something that actually occurred. You can understand what's going on here with the entire situation. She's not trying to embellish the narrative in any way. She just gives this account that is basically giving facts. She's not blaming anyone for anything. She's not putting shade on anything. She's just relaying her experience. And of course, what she says at the end about them heading off into the trailer also says to me that the whole thing it rings true. Because without putting it into words, she's saying that it was an awkward situation that she felt that she was intruding on. She felt uncomfortable and she wanted to get out of there. But she didn't actually need to say that in so many words, because the way she basically said we kept going on into the trailer made it pretty clear. So I do put a lot of credibility into this statement. So I do want to unpack what's being said here. First of all, we need to acknowledge that Janie hasn't said the incident did not occur. So she has confirmed this incident occurred. She's simply saying that the reason for her crying was because she felt responsible for the children going missing. As I've already said, that sounds like complete utter BS to me. And I've got a few more clips after this one that I will play which support my theory. So we have Belinda arriving and Janie sitting on some sort of bench thing. That's the sawhorse that Janie was talking about, with a woman beside her and a policewoman standing there. That would be the Detective Mason that we've heard, Constable Mason that we've heard about. And she says Janie was crying a lot. So Janie is in a situation here where she has the police officer in front of her, she has another woman with her, and she's emotional over this interaction. And now we hear what the interaction is. So the woman who is with her refers to her as Mum. Now, I've not heard her refer to having any daughters, so I'm wondering if this is the daughter-in-law, Justin's wife. Unfortunately, when Belinda was relaying this event, she couldn't remember who this individual was. She said Malaya told her, but she forgot, which is understandable. You've got all these extra faces suddenly, all these names to remember. Heck, I wouldn't remember everyone. So you have Belinda there crying, and this woman is saying, it's okay, they're not blaming you. They just want to look in your trailer. They're not blaming you. They just want to look in your trailer. That to me says that prior to this response, Janie is upset over them wanting to look in her trailer and is accusing this officer of blaming her for the children going missing. And that actually makes a heck of a lot more sense than her story that she gives later on of that she was blaming herself for the children going missing. So she's actually flipped the story on its head, and where she has been upset because she didn't want to let them in the trailer and basically tried to use a bit of emotional manipulation there and essentially saying, well, they must blame me if they want to look in the trailer. And the emotional manipulation didn't work. Tried the tears. This person has said, no, they're not blaming you. They just want to look in your trailer. And according to Belinda's narrative, this woman that was with Janie essentially doubled down on it, saying they're not blaming you. They just need to make sure that there's nothing in the trailer. And then the next part matches with what Janie was saying in terms of her dog. Because Belinda says Janie told them there was nothing in her trailer and she didn't want them around her dog. Janie has made a huge issue about not wanting them in the trailer because of her dog being in there. I do find that significant, and I will address that in a separate video. But here, the big issue for Janie is she doesn't want them in her trailer, she doesn't want them around her dog. And Belinda is telling us that she is crying a lot at this point in time. We then have the policewoman following through and saying that she was impeding the investigation and that she would have to get a search warrant. So when you hear that as well, that says that this encounter has probably been going on for a little while before Belinda even got there. For the officer to reach the point where they are saying, well, here's the deal. The kid gloves are off, and she's basically laying it on the line. This is the situation. If you won't let us in, you are impeding the investigation. We will have to get a warrant. And we can presume from Janie's own account that that is exactly what occurred, because Janie, in this particular discussion, later on mentions that she talks about getting the search people in to look at her trailer, and then she says, and then Constable Mason came back and searched it the next day, which she's not outwardly admitting that they came back with a warrant, but that's basically what it means. Because, of course, after this discussion, for her to come back the following day and do the search rather than do it that day that makes it pretty damn clear that they had to get a warrant, that Janie refused entry to her RV. So based on what we're hearing here, it sounds to me that the reason Janie was crying was out of frustration and anger, not over regret. She was frustrated, she was angry because this officer wanted to search her RV and she wasn't having a bar of it. She didn't want them anywhere near her RV, she didn't want them anywhere near her dog. That is what was going on at the time that she was crying. And you have this other woman saying, it's okay, they're not blaming you. Janie has latched onto that and decided, hey, that's a good reason. I'm going to say I was crying because I blame myself for the children going missing. Whereas I'm willing to bet that had Janie arrived a few minutes earlier, then she would have actually witnessed Janie accusing the constable of basically blaming her for the children going missing. Classic emotional manipulation. My thoughts on this entire encounter is that Janie was pulling out all the stops to try and manipulate the situation here because she did not want them going into her RV. For some reason, it was really important for them not to go into her RV and search her RV. And like I said, I'm going to cover this in a separate video because I think there's many moving parts there. So like I said, I'm going to say that the tears were either a reaction of anger and frustration, where a person just becomes so angry and so frustrated that they do end up emotional. I think there is definitely an element of manipulation here, given the comment of, it's okay, they're not blaming you. It's also possible, given what we just heard before in terms of her saying in one clip that she blamed herself and sounding aggro, and then in the next clip saying the same thing and sounding upset, it is also possible that it was a put on. If Belinda was feeling uncomfortable with the situation, she wouldn't have been hanging around to really get a feel of body language, to really see if Janie was actually crying. This is a woman who she had never met before at this point in time. She didn't even know who she was. She had just arrived on this property that she'd never been to before, and she wanted to be out of that particular situation as quickly as possible and made a beeline for the trailer to get away from it. So she would not be paying a lot of attention to whether or not all the crying was real or not. And I'm not saying it isn't real. What I'm saying here is that if it was real, it was frustration and anger because she was having trouble with making sure that they did not search her RV. That was the main concern for her at that point in time. Now, I'm going to play 3 more very short clips, which I think show us again that Janie really didn't blame herself for the children going missing.
And yes, Justin did cry because I was crying. And Justin felt bad for me because I was blaming myself for not getting up and checking on Jack and Lilly. That's the reason why Justin was crying, because he was crying because I was crying. And he was also crying because he was upset about Jack and Lilly disappearing.
Now, we know pretty much nothing about Justin because this is one of the rare occasions when he's been discussed. But I'm just going to put it out there now. Based on what we've seen of Daniel, based on what we've seen of Janie, and based on what we've seen of Earl, I cannot see how it could be remotely possible for Justin to be the sort of empath that cries because his mother is crying. Maybe if he had some form of neurological disability in terms of autism, and I'm talking full-on autism, not just being slightly on the spectrum, or some sort of other kind of neurological condition, Down syndrome, something where they are severely delayed developmentally and at a much lower age level in terms of their mental capacity, mental ability. Now, he's married. That doesn't necessarily mean that he couldn't be profoundly disabled. I do think that if he was, we would have heard about it by now. I also think that if he was, we wouldn't be hearing this narrative of him going out on the four-wheeler with Janie to do all this searching. He certainly sounds more than capable, and the one photo that we have that shows him and Daniel on that four-wheeler bike, he certainly doesn't appear to have anything like Down syndrome or any of those other types of profound disabilities, which, as well as having effect on the mental capacity, also shows in the physical appearance. Note also, we didn't hear anything in Belinda's account about Justin crying. So this seems to be something that Janie has added in herself. And she's claiming that he was crying because she was crying, and then she has real trouble getting this one out, saying that he was crying also because he was crying about Lily and Jack. But she really struggled to spit that one out, which made it pretty clear that that was complete utter BS also. Trying to add Justin into the narrative in terms of we're all so devastated about Lily and Jack in such a way that is so unconvincing, to me shoots down the whole argument. But there's more to come.
And I'll tell you something else. For the last 2 years, I observed those kids in my backyard. And the only time that Malaya went out with those kids is when she took Meadow out. And when she took Meadow out, that's all she would do was take her over to see the chickens.
Again, I've addressed this statement in a previous video, so I won't go too much into it. But note she says she observed those kids. In other words, you know, she watched them. Observing is not so much that you're interacting, you're there with them. Observing implies you're watching from somewhere, i.e. from in her RV. It's more of a passive thing than an active thing. Like I said in my previous video, I could talk about observing the birds out through my window. I'm not outside babysitting them. I'm just observing them from inside. She refers to the children again twice as those kids. So again, it's that emotional distancing. Those kids. Those kids that I have no emotional connection to. Not the children. Not Jack and Lily, but those kids. And the big thing here is she says the only time Malaya went out with those kids, and talks about that she went out because she had Meadow. But her emphasising this is the only time Malaya went out with those kids, that says to me that in her personal opinion, Malaya should have been outside watching those kids all the time. So who do you think Janie, if she cared about these kids, who do you think she really would be blaming for them going missing? She is essentially setting up the narrative here that she took on the responsibility of watching those kids because Malaya was an irresponsible mother who never supervised them when they were outside. Now, if you believed that, why would you then blame yourself? You wouldn't. You would blame the mother. Janie has put a lot of work into creating narratives that paint Malaya in a bad light, that show that Malaya never paid any attention to what was going on with the children. Malaya never bothered to supervise them when they were outside. Like I said, had she said to us, look, I had said to Malaya, I'm going to keep an eye on the kids for you so you can worry about Meadow because she's so little and takes up so much of your time right now. So don't stress about the children when they're outside. I'll keep an eye on them. But that's not what she's telling us. She is telling us that she was essentially forced to observe the children, not watch them, but observe them, meaning, forced to watch them from inside her RV because of Malaya's negligence. If she is going to blame anyone for those children going missing, her language tells us that she blames Malaya. She is telling us that we should blame Malaya. Look at Malaya, she's such a bad mum. It is her fault that this happened.
Yes, I did more interaction with those children than Malaya did.
Again, she's saying, look at Malaya, she is a bad mum. She's making it so clear to her audience that the person who is the villain in this whole story is Malaya. You can't paint someone as being a negligent parent and then turn around and say that you blame yourself for the children going missing. Particularly given that pretty much every time you refer to them as those children, making it pretty clear that you actually have no emotional connection to them.
And I'll tell you something else, and I don't care if you believe me or not. I would never, ever, ever let anything happen to those kids. I watched them for 2 years. I seen them day in and day out. And when you have to call your kids, or Jack and Lily's mother, and tell them that Jack has his boots off and Jack has his coats off, does that tell you that Malaya was watching the kids? So don't come down on me because they weren't my grandchildren.
So she starts with saying, I would never let anything happen to those kids. Again, it's that emotional separation. It's not, I would never let anything happen to Jack and Lily. Those kids. She doesn't feel an emotional connection to these children. And then she goes on to say, and when you have to call your kids, Jack and Lily's mother. Now, when she's talking about yours and your kids, she's not thinking of Jack and Lily as her kids. She's referring to Daniel.
No, I don't believe Daniel had anything to do with the disappearance of Jack and Lily. Our heart don't lie, and my heart is telling me that my kid did not have nothing to do with this, and I had nothing to do with this.
She still refers to Daniel and Justin as her kids. So I think what she's starting to say here, when you have to call yours or your kids Jack and Lily's mother, it just shows you how very little respect she has for Malaya because she doesn't want to use her name. Malaya to her is her kid's partner. The only emotional connection she has to Malaya is because Malaya was her son's partner. So even there, she's establishing how she feels about Malaya. And then she goes on to say, and tell them that Jack has his boots and coat off. Does that tell you that Malaya was watching the kids? So she's making it really, really clear in that statement there that Malaya is so neglectful of these children that she doesn't even see that Jack has his boots off and Jack has his coats off. So Malaya is such a bad mother. See, she was not watching her kids. What is she establishing here? Look at Malaya. She's the bad mother. She's the one at fault here. She was not watching her kids. This is what Janie claims in terms of, I blame myself because I wasn't watching them. No, she doesn't blame herself. She blames Malaya. And her concern is not so much about the fact that these children are gone. It's about the impact it has had on her personal life. Because now she doesn't get to see her own grandchildren. I'm going to cover that in another video also. But the statement, does that tell you that Malaya was watching the kids? Makes it pretty clear what she's saying here. The responsibility for those children lies on Malaya. You never hear her at this point in time blaming Daniel. It's only one parent here that is being blamed for not watching those kids. You can't tell me that every single time those children were outside that Daniel wasn't home, but she never once claims that Daniel was negligent because he didn't watch the children. It is all about Malaya is their mother. She is responsible for them. She should have been watching them. And just in case you weren't certain of who should be held responsible for these children going missing, she doubles down with, so don't come down on me. They're not my grandchildren. So after trying to convince people that she feels responsible for the children going missing, she works especially hard to discredit Malaya, to convince people that Malaya is a bad mother, that she was a negligent mother, that she wasn't watching her children, and that it is her fault. Don't come down on me. They weren't my grandchildren. That is not the words of someone who claims that they blamed themselves for these children going missing. That is the words of someone saying, don't come down on me. Wasn't my responsibility. Wasn't my fault. So it certainly seems that her claims of the reason I was crying when Belinda saw me was because I blamed myself are complete, utter BS. Because everything else she says, not only that, the discrepancy in her emotional state between the two times when she says that, all those things point to the fact that she does not remotely consider it to be even close to being her fault or her responsibility that those children are gone. She wants people to believe those children are gone because Malaya was a bad mother. Don't look at her. Don't look at Daniel. So on that note, I will finish there. Thank you for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button. YouTube loves it. That gets these videos back there out into the algorithm. And of course, please leave a comment below. Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.